Devil's Rock. Even the name tasted like ash in your mouth. It wasn't just a big hill overlooking the town of Oakhaven. It was a presence, a silent watcher that had seen generations born and buried. Locals whispered it was a place where the veil between worlds was thin, where the earth remembered things best forgotten. The rock itself was a jagged scar against the horizon, a dark silhouette against the ever-changing sky. Twisted, gnarled trees clung to its sides like skeletal fingers, their branches reaching out as if to snatch unsuspecting souls. They said strange lights danced on its peak during moonless nights, and the wind carried whispers that sounded like tormented cries. Old Man Hemlock, the town's self-proclaimed historian and resident crazy, swore Devil's Rock was built upon an ancient burial ground, a place where rituals were performed under the watchful eyes of forgotten gods. He claimed the land was hungry, always craving a taste of blood, and that Oakhaven paid its dues far too often. Whether it was true or just the ramblings of a senile mind, no one dared venture up there after dark. Devil's Rock was a boundary, a line drawn in the dust that separated the living from the something else. And today, that line was about to be crossed. The air was thick with the smell of sawdust and despair. A makeshift gallows stood stark against the pale dawn sky, its rough-hewn timbers a grim testament to Oakhaven's rough justice. The rusted noose, thick as a man's wrist, hung limp, a silent promise fulfilled. It had seen its share of necks, each swing adding another layer of rust, another ghost to the Devil's Rock's collection. Below, the freshly dug grave yawned open, a raw wound in the earth. The soil was dry and dusty, crumbling at the edges like forgotten memories. It was too short, really, but Silas Creed wasn't a big man. Just big enough to cause trouble, some said. The townsfolk stood back, a silent, somber crowd. Some averted their eyes, unable to bear witness to the finality of it all. Others stared, a mixture of fear and morbid curiosity etched on their faces. The sheriff, his face etched with a weariness that went beyond sleepless nights, gave the signal. The trapdoor sprung open with a sickening thud, and Silas Creed dropped into the abyss. A collective gasp swept through the crowd, followed by an unsettling silence. The rope creaked, the body twitched, and then nothing. The sun climbed higher, casting long, distorted shadows across the scene, turning the dusty grave into a dark, bottomless pit. Justice had been served, or so they thought. 3 weeks earlier, the Oakhaven savings and loan was robbed. Old Mrs. Abernathy, the teller, was found tied up in the back room, shaken but unharmed. The money, a considerable sum for a town like Oakhaven, was gone. Suspicion immediately fell on Silas Creed. He was known for his gambling debts, his quick temper, and his general air of shiftiness. The evidence was circumstantial at best. A muddy boot print near the back door matched the size and tread of Silas's boots. A witness claimed to have seen someone resembling Silas hurrying away from the bank around the time of the robbery. And Silas, unable to provide a solid alibi, only fueled the flames of suspicion. During the trial, Silas pleaded his innocence with a fervor that bordered on desperation. "I didn't do it. I swear, I wouldn't hurt a fly, let alone rob a bank," he cried, his voice cracking with emotion. He claimed he was out fishing that day, but no one could corroborate his story. The townsfolk, already predisposed to believe the worst of him, saw his pleas as nothing more than a cunning act. The jury, swayed by the circumstantial evidence and the pervasive prejudice, found him guilty. As the verdict was read, Silas slumped in his chair, his face a mask of despair. "You're making a mistake," he shouted, his voice hoarse. "An innocent man is going to die." But his words fell on deaf ears. Oakhaven had made up its mind. As the sun climbed higher, baking the dust around the gallows, the townsfolk slowly dispersed, carrying with them a heavy burden of mixed emotions. Some felt a sense of relief. Old Mrs. Abernathy, though physically unharmed, had been deeply shaken by the robbery. For them, Silas's execution brought a sense of closure, a feeling that justice, however harsh, had been served. Others were not so sure. Whispers of doubt circulated amongst them like a chilling draft. Had they been too quick to judge? Had they relied too heavily on circumstantial evidence? The image of Silas, his face contorted in a silent scream as the trapdoor opened, haunted their waking hours. They couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Even those who believed in Silas's guilt couldn't entirely shake off a sense of unease. Devil's Rock seemed to loom larger than usual that day, its shadow stretching across the town like a dark omen. They spoke of strange occurrences, unexplained chills, unsettling dreams, the feeling of being watched. It was as if the land itself was disturbed by the events that had transpired. The execution might have ended Silas Creed's life, but it had also opened a door to something far more sinister, a darkness that threatened to engulf Oakhaven. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of blood orange and bruised purple. A chilling wind swept down from Devil's Rock, carrying with it the scent of pine and something else, something metallic and unsettling. The first whisper started in the saloon, carried by a nervous traveler who claimed to have seen something moving on the lower slopes of the rock. At first, no one believed him. Drunkards' tales, they scoffed. But the traveler insisted, his voice trembling. He described a figure, gaunt and pale, moving with an unnatural gait. Barefoot, bloody, heading towards town. The whisper spread like wildfire, jumping from saloon to general store, from house to house. Fear replaced doubt, turning the uneasy feeling into full-blown panic. People peeked through their curtains, their eyes scanning the darkening landscape. They remembered Old Man Hemlock's stories about Devil's Rock, about the restless spirits that roamed its slopes. Then someone else saw it. A young boy, fetching water from the well, screamed and dropped his bucket. He pointed a trembling finger towards the road leading from Devil's Rock. A figure was indeed walking towards them, slow and deliberate, bathed in the fading light. The whisper became a terrified shout. Silas Creed was coming home. The figure drew closer, and the initial disbelief began to crumble like dry earth. The way he moved, it wasn't quite right. Too stiff, too deliberate, as if his joints were rusted hinges. He didn't swing his arms, didn't seem to react to the uneven ground. Just a steady, unwavering march towards the heart of Oakhaven. Then, someone screamed, "It's him! It's Silas!" As the moonlight illuminated his face, all doubt vanished. It was Silas Creed, but changed. His skin was pale and waxy, stretched taut over his bones. His clothes, the same ones he wore to the gallows, were torn and stained with dirt and blood. But it was his eyes that truly terrified them. They were vacant, devoid of life, like empty sockets staring into the abyss. He didn't speak, didn't acknowledge the horrified faces peering from windows and doorways. He simply walked, his bare feet leaving bloody prints on the dusty road. There was no anger, no vengeance in his expression, just an unnerving emptiness that chilled them to the bone. This wasn't the Silas Creed they knew, the flawed, but ultimately human, man they had sentenced to death. This was something else entirely. Something unnatural, something that should have stayed buried. Pure, unadulterated panic seized Oakhaven. Women screamed, children cried, and men scrambled for weapons. Some, driven by blind terror, bolted their doors and windows, praying that whatever had brought Silas back wouldn't be able to get in. Others, fueled by desperate courage, grabbed their rifles and shotguns, determined to defend their homes and families. The general store was ransacked as people fought over axes, knives, and ammunition. The blacksmith worked feverishly, hammering out makeshift weapons from scrap metal. The town, once a picture of quiet rural life, transformed into a chaotic scene of fear and desperation. But amidst the chaos, Sheriff Brody stood frozen. He watched Silas approach, his face ashen, his hands trembling uncontrollably. The guilt he had tried to suppress, the nagging doubts about Silas's guilt, now crashed down upon him like a tidal wave. He had sent an innocent man to his death, and now that man was back. Not as a vengeful spirit, not as a raging monster, but as something far more terrifying, a silent embodiment of his own failure. He raised his hand to reach for his gun, but his arm felt like lead. He was paralyzed, not by fear of Silas, but by the crushing weight of his conscience. Silas didn't charge, didn't attack. He simply walked. He moved through the town like a ghost, his silent presence more terrifying than any roar or threat. He passed by armed men trembling with fear, their weapons raised but never fired. He walked past women clutching their children, their faces buried in prayer. He walked past the saloon, the church, the general store, his vacant eyes taking it all in, but revealing nothing. It was this quiet observation that unnerved them the most. What was he looking for? What did he want? Was he planning something? Or is he simply there? A chilling reminder of their collective guilt, a walking testament to their hasty judgment. His silence was deafening, a constant accusation that echoed through the empty streets. Every step he took, every bloody footprint he left behind, amplified the fear and uncertainty that gripped Oakhaven. He was a specter, a phantom, an embodiment of their deepest anxieties. And as he continued his silent procession, the townsfolk realized that Silas Creed's return wasn't about vengeance. It was about something far more profound, something that threatened to unravel the very fabric of their community. It was about truth, or perhaps something far worse than truth. Generations ago, before Oakhaven even existed, Devil's Rock was a sacred place to a tribe long forgotten. They believed it was a gateway to the spirit world, a place where they could commune with their ancestors and seek guidance from the gods. But their rituals were dark, involving blood sacrifices and whispered incantations under the light of the full moon. Flashback: a shaman, adorned with feathers and bones, chanted in a guttural tongue as he raised an obsidian knife above a young woman tied to a stone altar. The air crackled with energy, and the ground trembled beneath their feet. The sacrifice was meant to appease the hungry spirits of the rock, to ensure a bountiful harvest and protection from their enemies. But the spirits were never satisfied. They demanded more and more, driving the tribe to madness and, ultimately, their demise. Their bones were buried beneath the rock, their souls trapped in the swirling vortex of energy they had unleashed. The settlers who came later knew nothing of this history. They only saw a barren hill, a natural landmark that offered a commanding view of the surrounding area. But the land remembered. The dark energy lingered, seeping into the soil, twisting the trees, and whispering secrets to those who dared to listen. Devil's Rock was not just a hill. It was a wound in the earth, a gateway to something ancient and malevolent. And Silas Creed's execution had reopened that wound, unleashing something that should have remained dormant. Driven by a mixture of morbid curiosity and a desperate need for answers, a small group of armed men cautiously approached Silas. They managed to corner him in the town square, their rifles trained on his chest. Dr. Albright, the town's physician, stepped forward, his hands trembling. "Silas," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Silas, can you hear me?" Silas didn't respond. He simply stood there, his vacant eyes fixed on some distant point beyond the town. Dr. Albright, emboldened by the silence, reached out and placed a hand on Silas's arm. The skin was cold, clammy, yet strangely warm. He fumbled for his stethoscope, pressing it against Silas's chest. Silence. No heartbeat. He checked for a pulse in his wrist, his neck. Nothing. He shined a light into Silas's eyes. No reaction. Dr. Albright recoiled in horror. "He's dead," he stammered, his voice rising in panic. "He's truly dead. There's no pulse, no breath, no signs of life." But then he touched Silas's cheek again. It was warm, unnaturally warm. How could a dead man be warm? The realization dawned on them, chilling them to the bone. They had hanged him, buried him, and yet here he was, walking, silent, dead yet somehow alive. Or rather, undead. A terrifying paradox that defied all logic and reason. The doctor's pronouncement shattered the last vestiges of reason. Fear morphed into a primal rage, a desperate need to reclaim control of the situation. If Silas was dead, yet walking, Then they would simply have to kill him again. This time, they wouldn't make any mistakes. A mob formed, fueled by fear and a misguided sense of righteousness. They armed themselves with whatever they could find: axes, shovels, pitchforks, anything that could inflict damage. They were no longer thinking clearly, driven only by the instinct to survive. They saw Silas not as a man, but as a monster, an abomination that needed to be eradicated. "He's a demon," someone shouted. "He's been sent by the devil." The cry was taken up by the crowd, their voices rising in a frenzied chorus. They surged forward, their faces contorted with hatred and fear, determined to finish what they had started. They would tear him apart, limb from limb, if that's what it took to ensure he stayed dead this time. They would cleanse Oakhaven of this unholy presence, even if it meant sacrificing their own souls in the process. The line between justice and madness had blurred, and the mob was hurtling towards the abyss. As the mob surged forward, Silas didn't flinch. He simply turned his vacant gaze towards Sheriff Brody, who still stood frozen, watching the unfolding horror. Silas began to walk towards him, his bare feet dragging slightly on the dusty ground. The mob hesitated, momentarily stunned by Silas's unwavering focus. Silas stopped directly in front of Brody, his silent presence a more powerful accusation than any words could convey. He stared into Brody's eyes, his own empty sockets seeming to pierce through the sheriff's soul. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Then Brody broke. "I did it," he screamed, his voice cracking with hysterical sobs. "I framed him. I planted the boot print. I paid the witness to lie." The mob gasped, their bloodlust momentarily forgotten. All eyes turned to the sheriff, their faces a mixture of shock, disbelief, and disgust. "He took my wife," Brody continued, his voice barely audible. "Years ago. Ran off with her. I never forgave him. I waited for my chance to get even. And when the robbery happened, it was perfect. No one would suspect me. I made sure the evidence pointed to him." He collapsed to his knees, his body racked with sobs. "I'm sorry," he wept. "I'm so sorry. I killed an innocent man." The truth, long buried, had finally surfaced, dragged out by the silent, accusing gaze of the man he had wronged. Brody's confession momentarily stunned the mob, but the fear, once unleashed, was difficult to contain. Some felt a pang of guilt, a flicker of remorse for the innocent man they had condemned. But others, hardened by years of prejudice and driven by a primal fear of the unknown, were unmoved. "It doesn't matter," someone shouted. "He's still dead. He's still an abomination." The mob surged forward again, their weapons raised, their faces contorted with a mixture of fear and righteous anger. But Silas didn't fight back. He didn't run, didn't scream, didn't even flinch. He simply looked at them. His vacant eyes, once empty and terrifying, now held a glimmer of something else. It wasn't anger, wasn't vengeance, wasn't even sadness. It was understanding, a profound, unsettling understanding of their fear, their guilt, their desperation. It was as if he saw into their souls, acknowledging the darkness that resided within them. The mob faltered, their steps slowing. They saw their own fear reflected in his vacant gaze, their own guilt mirrored in his silent suffering. For a fleeting moment, they saw him not as a monster, but as a victim, a man who had been wronged, not just by the sheriff, but by all of them. The moment of hesitation was brief, but it was enough to sow a seed of doubt in their hearts. The moment of hesitation was enough. Silas turned away from the mob, his movements still slow and deliberate, and began to walk back towards Devil's Rock. No one tried to stop him. The spell of fear and rage had been broken, replaced by a chilling uncertainty. They watched him go, their weapons hanging limply at their sides, their faces etched with confusion and a growing sense of dread. The sun had almost completely set, casting long, distorted shadows across the town. As Silas reached the edge of Oakhaven, the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind Devil's Rock, plunging the town into darkness. He continued to walk, his figure silhouetted against the darkening sky. He didn't look back. He simply walked, his bare feet carrying him towards the ominous silhouette of Devil's Rock. As he reached the base of the hill, He stepped into the shadows, disappearing from sight. The mob watched, their breath held, waiting for something to happen. But nothing did. Silas was gone, swallowed by the darkness, reclaimed by the ancient power of Devil's Rock. The town was left in silence, the only sound the mournful whisper of the wind, carrying secrets they didn't want to hear. They were left to grapple with the truth, the guilt, and the terrifying realization that some doors, once opened, can never be truly closed. Oakhaven was plunged into a silence deeper than any they had ever known. The mob dispersed, their bravado replaced by a lingering fear that clung to them like a shroud. They returned to their homes, bolting their doors and windows, but knowing that no physical barrier could keep out the darkness that had settled upon their town. The truth of Brody's confession hung heavy in the air, adding another layer of guilt to their already burdened consciences. They had condemned an innocent man, driven by prejudice and fear, and now they had unleashed something they couldn't understand, something that defied the natural order. As the night deepened, the wind picked up, swirling around the town, carrying with it the scent of pine and the faint, metallic tang of blood. The only sound was the creaking of the gallows, a constant reminder of their terrible mistake. Final scene. The camera focuses on the gallows, the rough-hewn timbers stark against the night sky. The rusted noose, the instrument of their flawed justice, sways gently in the breeze, a silent pendulum counting down the moments until the next transgression, the next descent into darkness. The wind whispers through the rope, carrying a faint, mournful sound, a lament for the innocent and a warning for the guilty. The shadow of Devil's Rock looms large in the background, a constant reminder that Oakhaven's story is far from over. The darkness is always watching,